The foundational failure in current luxury asset valuation, and this is something sitting right on your balance sheet today, is a massive failure of categorization.
It is entirely systemic.
Look, if you examine how boards and sovereign investors operate, there's a continuous mispricing of culture, identity, and experience.
You currently treat these elements as decorative. You view them as soft metrics.
Right. You relegate them to your marketing departments, you treat them as matters of subjective aesthetic preference.
Something for interior designers to argue about. Precisely.
I am telling you right now, this is a critical strategic vulnerability. Culture, identity, and experiential intelligence are hard, measurable infrastructure.
Yes.
When you fail to evaluate them with the exact same rigor that you apply to your financial data or your engineering reports, you are silently destroying asset value.
Exactly. And to correct this structural failure, we are deploying the Cultural and Creative Performance Index, the CCPI.
Consider this your executive briefing on how this architecture fundamentally changes capital allocation.
The CCPI is a sovereign, semi-quantitative diagnostic engine. Its explicit purpose is to take those supposedly soft elements you just mentioned, the atmosphere, the brand identity, and translate them into hard, unforgiving capital allocation logic.
Over the course of this briefing, we are going to fully deconstruct how this engine works.
We will explain precisely how this system measures ultra-high-value assets across 5 specific sectors: cruise, marinas, hotels and resorts, mega yachts, and real estate.
We evaluate these assets across 10 distinct dimensions.
And we do this to determine 3 very specific, highly lucrative outcomes: pricing power, valuation resilience, and long-term competitive defensibility.
I want to pause right there. We need to establish the core thesis before we get into the mechanics. The underlying premise here is that identity and experiential intelligence are not expenses.
They are capital multipliers.
Right. But let us unpack that terminology. When we say semi-quantitative diagnostic architecture, I want to make sure we are clear on what we are actually doing.
We are taking something inherently subjective, like how a space makes a guest feel, and forcing it into a strict mathematical model.
Why is that paradigm shift so critical for a C-suite executive who is about to authorize a $100 million capital expenditure?
It is critical because without quantification, there is no accountability. When an asset lacks a deliberately offered experience, it becomes generic.
And generic assets are easily substituted.
Exactly. If your luxury resort offers the exact same spatial layout and the exact same borrowed aesthetics as the resort 3 miles down the coast, you have no strategic moat,
You are forced to compete on price.
which immediately erodes your pricing power. Strategic failures in these cultural areas do not announce themselves with sirens. They silently destroy asset value over time. They leave the asset highly vulnerable to market volatility.
The CCPI forces a board-level realization. Culture must be quantified and managed as a primary driver of financial yield.
If you cannot measure it, you cannot protect it.
Okay, let us unpack the overarching mechanics of this diagnostic. We are talking about a sovereign index scored from 0 to 100.
That final score is what lands on the executive desk.
It provides an immediate, unfiltered read on the structural health of the asset. Let us break down the interpretation of that 0 to 100 scale.
We divide this into 4 strict interpretation bands.
If an asset scores above an 80, we categorize that as sovereign performance.
At this level, the asset functions as a highly defensible capital multiplier. It dictates its own pricing.
If it scores between 60 and 79, that represents strong performance.
It means you have reliable defensibility, but there are operational inefficiencies leaving money on the table.
Right. A score between 40 and 59 signifies weak performance. This is where we see structural vulnerabilities that will inevitably compromise your long-term valuation.
And anything below a 40 represents critical structural failure.
If you see a score below 40, you require immediate strategic intervention before a single additional dollar of capital is deployed.
And to achieve that final 0 to 100 score, the methodology relies on a strict 0 to 10 anchor-based scoring scale. We apply this to every one of the 10 dimensions we evaluate.
We divide this 0 to 10 scale into 4 narrative thresholds.
A score of 0 to 2 is critical. A score of 3 to 5 is weak. A score of 6 to 8 is strong. A score of 9 to 10 is sovereign.
It is absolutely imperative to understand that these scores are grounded entirely in observable, cross-validated evidence.
This is not about whether we personally like the color of the lobby furniture.
No, this is not based on subjective aesthetic preference. We are measuring actual structural and experiential behavior under real operational load.
Let us get into the specifics of this, starting with the first half of the index.
Dimensions 1 through 5 deal directly with identity, culture, and experiential logic. Dimension 1 is identity coherence.
This measures the clarity, unity, and recognizability of the authored identity across the architecture, the interiors, and the operations.
Give me a real-world scenario. Walk me through what a critical score of 0 to 2 actually looks like when you are evaluating an asset.
Let us imagine you are acquiring a flagship hospitality asset. You walk into the main arrival space. The architecture is a hyper-modern, minimalist glass structure.
But the interior design looks like a 19th century colonial club.
Exactly, because a legacy design team was kept on board from a previous renovation cycle to cut costs. Furthermore, the staff uniforms look like they belong on a generic mass-market cruise ship.
And the digital interfaces look like a tech startup.
That is a critical score of 0 to 2. The identity is inconsistent, fragmented, and contradictory.
The environment appears assembled from unrelated design decisions. What does this do to the asset?
It fails to project a stable identity. That immediately confuses the consumer and dilutes your brand equity.
You will spend millions in marketing just to explain what the property is, and you will still fail to secure loyalty.
It is a collage of incoherence.
So on the flip side, what does a sovereign score of 9 or 10 look like for identity coherence? How does that translate to value?
A sovereign score means the identity is authored with exceptional, ruthless clarity. Every single spatial, material, and narrative decision reinforces a coherent symbolic logic.
If you look at the most successful ultra-luxury resorts, their signature elements are structurally embedded.
They are impossible to imitate without copying the entire system. You know exactly where you are the moment you cross the threshold.
The moment you touch the materials.
Exactly. This translates directly into uncompromising brand recognition. It lowers your customer acquisition cost because the asset markets itself through pure coherence.
That transitions perfectly into Dimension 2, experiential sequencing.
We are measuring the structured progression of the user journey.
You have to view the journey through the asset as an authored narrative arc. It is not just a collection of rooms. It is a sequence of events.
Let us examine a weak score here, 3 to 5.
What is the operational reality of a weakly sequenced asset?
A weak score indicates that while some basic experiential structure exists, it is weakly articulated. Look at a high-end marina. A guest arrives, they drop their bags, they walk down a corridor, they enter a lounge.
The transitions from one space to another are merely functional.
They get you from point A to point B, but they are devoid of meaning. There is no psychological shift, no buildup of anticipation.
No compression and release of space.
Right. The sequence fails to support memory formation. The user is unengaged. They might find the space objectively pleasant, but they will not remember it a year from now.
And if they do not remember it, they have no emotional compulsion to return or to pay a premium.
I want to focus on that phrase you used, compression and release of space.
When we are evaluating a sovereign score of 9 to 10 in experiential sequencing, we are looking for masterfully orchestrated sensory progression.
Let us use the cruise sector as an example.
We all know the standard embarkation process. It is a logistical nightmare of queues, fluorescent lighting, and key cards. It is a functional transition.
But a sovereign sequence orchestrates that progression. Every transition, every threshold, every spatial moment contributes to a deliberate narrative rhythm.
By the time the guest reaches their suite, the environment has produced deep emotional engagement.
It creates strong memory anchors. This orchestrated progression creates a sense of authored inevitability.
It binds the user to the asset. It transforms a logistical necessity into a luxury experience.
Exactly. And that brings us to Dimension 3, cultural depth.
This is where we separate superficial cliches from profound, contextually precise integration.
We see this failure constantly in global real estate. A critical score of 0 to 2 in cultural depth reveals that the cultural references are either entirely absent or painfully superficial.
The environment relies on borrowed aesthetics without any contextual meaning.
Imagine a resort in the Mediterranean that just slaps some blue and white tiles on the wall and calls it authentic.
It expresses no genuine connection to the specific history or intellectual legacy of its location.
It is a veneer. It offers no intellectual grounding.
I have to push back a bit here. In highly commercialized sectors, does superficial aesthetics not sell? Why is relying on a recognizable cliché an automatic critical failure if the asset is generating revenue?
Because we are measuring long-term valuation resilience and pricing power. We are not measuring just initial novelty revenue. Superficial aesthetics have an incredibly short half-life.
They're subject to the volatility of design trends.
If your asset relies on a cliché, what happens in 5 years when that cliché is no longer fashionable?
You are forced into a massive capital-intensive renovation cycle just to stay relevant.
Conversely, a sovereign score of 9 to 10 dictates that cultural depth is profound, original, and structurally embedded.
The asset expresses a sophisticated cultural logic that enriches the identity.
These references are inseparable from the architectural system. This depth provides an intellectual grounding that elevates the asset above market trends.
It becomes timeless, which means your capital expenditure on renovations is drastically reduced over a 20-year life cycle.
That is a crucial distinction for a board to understand. Cultural depth acts as an immunizer against trend volatility.
And that leads directly into dimension 4, conceptual originality.
This is a direct measure of your competitive differentiation.
Let us be blunt. A critical score here means your asset is derivative. It is indistinguishable from your competitors.
It relies on standard templates, imitative design, and industry norms.
Derivative assets offer zero authorship value. And because they offer zero authorship value, they offer zero strategic moat.
If you build a luxury marina that has the exact same layout, the exact same retail mix, and the exact same architectural profile as 3 other marinas in the region, why would a yacht owner choose yours?
They will choose based on proximity or slip fees.
You have lost your pricing power. Precisely.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 in conceptual originality means the asset is exceptional and unmistakable.
It possesses a unique, authored worldview. And here is the key operational point for the C-suite.
Because this worldview is structurally embedded across multiple layers, the architecture, the service logic, the cultural programming, it cannot be replicated by competitors.
They cannot just steal your floor plan. To
Yeah.
compete with you, they would have to blatantly copy your entire conceptual system.
Which would immediately expose them as a cheap imitation. This originality forms an impenetrable strategic moat around your valuation.
Let us round out the first half of the framework with Dimension 5, emotional resonance.
We often hear emotion dismissed in boardrooms as a soft, unquantifiable feeling. But the CCPI translates emotional attachment directly into behavioral economics.
We are talking about memory anchors. A weak score of 3 to 5 means the atmosphere varies unpredictably.
The emotional engagement is severely limited.
The environment might be nominally pleasant, but it fails to create strong memory anchors.
And what is the economic consequence of that? Repeat visitation is driven entirely by convenience or price, not loyalty.
You have to constantly acquire new customers to replace the ones who do not care enough to return. And the cost of customer acquisition is one of the heaviest drags on profitability.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 in emotional resonance means the impact is profound and unforgettable.
The atmosphere is controlled with absolute mastery. The acoustics, the lighting, the pacing of service.
These deep emotional impacts drive intense behavioral loyalty.
When a consumer has a profound emotional anchor to an asset, their price sensitivity plummets. They will pay a 40% premium to return to the space that made them feel a certain way.
That is how emotional resonance insulates your asset from competitor discounting.
So we have established the first 5 dimensions. We've defined how identity, culture, sequencing, originality, and emotion dictate the experiential value of the asset.
But how does all of that actually translate to the balance sheet? How does a culturally resonant space survive the brutal realities of daily operations?
That is where dimensions 6 through 10 come in. We are transitioning from the experiential logic to the spatial, operational, and economic hard logic.
Dimension 6 is spatial and functional integrity. This dimension assesses the physical architecture's alignment with operational reality.
And this is where so many high design concepts completely fall apart. They fall apart because the architect did not understand the operational flow.
Dysfunctional circulation or incoherent zoning immediately ruins the user experience.
And just as importantly, it severely frustrates your staff.
Yeah.
Let us look at a critical score of 0 to 2 in spatial and functional integrity.
This indicates that the spatial logic is inherently dysfunctional, confusing, or even unsafe.
Let me give you an example from the hospitality sector. We have all seen properties where the main guest walkway intersects directly with the primary service corridor.
You have guests an evening where walking to a Michelin-starred restaurant and they are dodging staff carrying dirty dishes or laundry carts.
Because the zoning is incoherent. That environment creates massive operational friction.
It slows down service, it breaks the experiential illusion for the guest, and it burns out your staff. That is a perfect example of design actively sabotaging the operation.
So a sovereign score of 9 to 10 in spatial and functional integrity means circulation, zoning, proportions, and operational logic are perfectly aligned.
The spatial architecture seamlessly merges experiential excellence with peak operational efficiency.
The back-of-house operations are invisible but highly efficient. The guest moves effortlessly,
Friction is eliminated entirely. This directly impacts your labor costs and your service delivery speed.
which ties directly into Dimension 7, operational robustness.
This dimension directly analyzes lifecycle durability. We're looking at how the asset holds up over 5, 10, 20 years.
A critical score of 0 to 2 means operations are literally compromised by design. Maintenance requires impossible workarounds.
Let us say a designer specifies a highly fragile custom-milled wood for a high-traffic flooring area in a coastal resort.
Or places critical HVAC access panels behind permanent, immovable decorative fixtures.
The physical asset degrades rapidly under real-world use.
If operations are compromised by design, maintenance becomes a constant value-draining burden.
Your capital expenditure budget explodes just trying to keep the place looking presentable. I see this constantly in real estate developments that look incredible on rendering day.
But within 3 years, the facade is deteriorating, the custom lighting is failing, and the maintenance staff are doing ad hoc repairs that ruin the aesthetic.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 in operational robustness proves that the asset is engineered for reality.
The environment supports seamless operations, presents a minimal maintenance burden, and ensures long-term durability.
Staff flow and lifecycle logic are perfectly integrated into the design. This protects your initial capital expenditure and drastically reduces your long-term operational overhead.
Now we reach the absolute core for any investor. Dimension 8, economic leverage.
This is the direct, measurable conversion of cultural and experiential quality into capital.
We evaluate whether the cultural quality of the asset actually justifies its premium positioning in the market.
A weak score of 3 to 5 means the cultural and experiential qualities are not fully monetized.
The asset might achieve acceptable baseline performance, but it demonstrates no strong pricing power and no valuation stability.
It is leaving money on the table because it has not figured out how to charge for the experience it provides. Let us talk about the mechanics of yield here.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 dictates that the environment functions as a pure capital multiplier.
The asset successfully converts its cultural, experiential, and identity strengths into premium pricing.
This means your average daily rate, your slip fees in a marina, or your price per square foot in real estate is fundamentally detached from the regional baseline.
You are not competing with the market average. You are defining your own market.
That high yield creates absolute valuation resilience when capitalization rates compress or the broader economy softens.
And you protect that high yield through Dimension 9, strategic defensibility.
This evaluates imitation risk. We touched on this with conceptual originality, but here we view it strictly through the lens of competitive market dynamics.
A critical asset scoring 0 to 2 is easily substituted. Competitors can replicate its offer with minimal effort.
If your entire value proposition is that you have the largest pool, or you use gold fixtures, someone else with a larger balance sheet can build a bigger pool next door.
You are highly vulnerable to market saturation. Capital alone cannot be your only competitive advantage because there is always someone with more capital.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 in strategic defensibility indicates total competitive insulation.
The asset possesses intellectual property, unique authored logic, and complex experiential systems that provide an absolute barrier to entry.
Your strategic position remains unassailable because a competitor cannot buy their way into replicating your culture.
They would have to spend a decade building the same nuanced operational intelligence. And by then, you have already captured the loyalty of the market.
Finally, Dimension 10 evaluates ecosystem integration.
We examine cross-sector coherence. In today's ultra-luxury landscape, brands are rarely confined to a single asset class.
A brand might own a flagship hotel, a branded residential tower, and a branded yacht collection.
A critical score of 0 to 2 means the asset is isolated and incompatible with the portfolio-level identity.
There is zero cross-sector coherence. The hotel experience feels entirely disjointed from the real estate experience.
The brand equity does not transfer. which is a massive missed opportunity for enterprise valuation.
A sovereign score of 9 to 10 means the ecosystem integration is exceptional.
The asset aligns perfectly with adjacent luxury sectors, reinforcing a unified cultural system across hospitality, yachting, aviation, real estate, and cruise platforms.
A client who buys a residence feels the exact same authored worldview when they charter the brand's yacht or stay in their resort.
This synergy creates a closed-loop ecosystem for your ultra-high net worth clients, maximizing portfolio-level valuation.
We've now deconstructed all 10 dimensions. But understanding the dimensions is only half the equation.
We must now examine the engine mechanics that aggregate these metrics. How do we get from 10 individual scores to a single sovereign 0 to 100 index?
The CCPI system does not treat every dimension equally across every industry. It would be analytically flawed to assume a cruise ship operates under the same economic physics as a static real estate development.
Therefore, we utilize a sector-adjusted weight matrix.
The 100-point total varies systematically based on the structural realities of the specific sector being evaluated.
I want to dig into these explicit weighting examples because this is where the CCPI proves its sophistication as an investment tool. Let us start with the cruise sector.
In this matrix, experiential sequencing and emotional resonance hold the highest weight. They each contribute 15 points to the total 100.
Why? Because of the enclosed, multi-day nature of a cruise. The user journey and the emotional arc are the absolute primary drivers of value.
A guest is captive in that environment for 7 to 14 days. If the sequence fails, or if the emotional resonance is flat, the entire product fails.
Regardless of how nice the spatial zoning is.
Conversely, look at hotels and resorts. In that matrix, identity coherence holds the highest weight at 15 points.
In a hyper-saturated global hospitality market, clear, recognizable identity is the primary differentiator. If you do not stand out immediately, you lose the booking.
For mega yachts, conceptual originality is paramount, heavily weighted at 15 points.
In that specific ultra-niche market, uniqueness and total non-replicability dictate the asset's prestige and its resale valuation. A billionaire does not want a boat that looks like everyone else's boat.
And then we shift to real estate and marinas. In these sectors, spatial and operational integrity, along with economic leverage, dominate the weighting structure.
Because these are heavily infrastructure-reliant asset classes, operational viability, life cycle durability, and pure yield are the foundational metrics.
A marina can have a brilliant cultural concept, but if the spatial zoning prevents large vessels from maneuvering efficiently, the asset is a failure.
The sector-adjusted matrix ensures the diagnostic remains strategically aligned with how money actually flows in that specific industry.
Now, let us detail the mathematical cleanliness of the aggregation formula applied to these weights. This is crucial for board-level auditability.
Each dimension score, which you recall is scaled from 0 to 10, is multiplied by its sector weight and then divided by 10.
To prove the logic, if a dimension has a sector weight of 15 and it scores a perfect 10, it contributes its full 15 points to the final index.
If it scores a 5, it contributes exactly half of its assigned weight, or 7.5 points.
If it scores a 0, it contributes nothing. The sum of all 10 weighted scores produces the final 0 to 100 sovereign index.
This strict mathematical structure prevents subjective drift and ensures absolute comparability across different assets within a portfolio.
However, because CCPI is a semi-quantitative system dealing with authored intelligence, it incorporates what we call expert overrides.
Now, I know the moment a risk committee hears the word override, alarm bells go off. You worry about analysts manipulating the data to please a client or justify a predetermined outcome.
But these overrides are necessary to capture nuanced, highly specific authorship that a mechanical scoring algorithm might misinterpret.
To prevent manipulation, we impose incredibly strict, non-negotiable governance over these overrides. Let us walk through the 3 types of overrides, starting with the soft override.
A soft override allows a plus or minus 1 point adjustment to a specific dimension score. This is utilized strictly for contextual nuance.
For example, an asset might technically violate a spatial zoning anchor, but does so in a way that is historically protected and deliberately leveraged as a charm factor.
This requires a formal one-sentence documentation in the audit log. The second tier is the hard override. This allows a plus or minus 2 point adjustment.
This is permitted only when the asset expresses exceptional paradigm-shifting authorship that simply is not captured by standard industry anchors.
Applying a hard override requires a comprehensive, multi-paragraph written justification defending the architectural or cultural merit of the deviation.
And the third override is the absolute override, which is the most aggressive tool in the system.
An absolute override forcibly caps a dimension at a maximum score of 3 or 4, regardless of what the other anchors suggest.
This is triggered exclusively by red flag conditions, which we will discuss in a moment. But let me emphasize the integrity constraints here.
The override limits are aggressively constrained. There is a maximum of exactly 3 total overrides permitted per diagnostic report.
Within those 3, there can be a maximum of only 1 hard override and a maximum of only 1 absolute override.
Furthermore, the final CCPI score can never be adjusted by more than 5 points overall.
This rigid constraint guarantees the data remains sovereign, auditable, and immune to client pressure or internal manipulation.
You mentioned red flag conditions triggering the absolute override. This brings us to the red flag system.
Which is essentially our non-negotiable risk mitigation protocol. Red flags exist to protect the credibility of the entire index.
They prevent an asset from achieving an artificially high overall score when catastrophic systemic structural failures exist beneath the surface.
If a red flag is identified by the diagnostic team, it automatically caps the affected dimension at a score of 3, immediately triggering that absolute override.
Let us categorize these triggers so executives know exactly what kills a deal or a score. We break them down into specific domains.
The first group is operational and identity flags. These are triggered by catastrophic failures in the physical or conceptual infrastructure.
Operational triggers are binary. Either they work or they fail. We are talking about safety system failures or impossible maintenance requirements where staff cannot physically access critical infrastructure.
Or staff flows that are critically obstructed to the point of breaking service delivery.
Identity flags are equally catastrophic but conceptual. These are triggered by contradictory design languages that assemble entirely unrelated interventions.
Creating a collage of incoherence. If an asset attempts to merge a high-tech futurist aesthetic with a rustic agrarian heritage concept in the exact same spatial zone without any intellectual synthesis, that is an identity red flag.
These structural failures cannot be ignored, regardless of how well the asset performs in other dimensions like emotional resonance or initial economic leverage. A fatal flaw is a fatal flaw.
The cultural, economic, and strategic flags operate on the same absolute logic. Cultural flags are triggered by offensive, misused, or highly tokenistic cultural references.
If an asset appropriates indigenous heritage merely as a decorative backdrop without any genuine integration or respect for context, that is a massive reputational and cultural risk.
And it triggers a red flag. Economic flags are triggered when the asset is fundamentally financially non-viable.
Meaning the pricing power is actively collapsing, or the revenue model is structurally misaligned with the massive operational costs required to maintain the asset's positioning.
And finally, strategic flags are triggered when the asset is entirely imitable, resulting in total competitive vulnerability.
If your entire concept can be legally and easily cloned by a competitor for a lower cost, you receive a strategic red flag.
The strict governance rule surrounding the system dictates that any red flag must be explicitly disclosed in the final executive report.
A red flag can never be softened to appease a developer, and it can never be reversed unless the underlying physical or conceptual infrastructure is completely rebuilt.
So we know what we're measuring and we know how we are scoring it. But how do we actually gather the intelligence?
To deploy this scoring engine, we rely on a highly rigorous evidence architecture. The CCPI, again, does not rely on aesthetic opinions.
It requires verifiable, cross-validated data collected systematically across 5 specific domains. The first domain is architectural and spatial documentation.
We do not just walk around the building. We mandate the rigorous review of architectural floor plans, circulation diagrams, zoning maps, and highly detailed material specifications.
This domain exposes the underlying structural logic, the friction points, and the legacy constraints of the asset before our diagnostic team even steps on site.
The second domain is operational and maintenance data. A beautiful building that cannot be cleaned is a failed building.
This domain demands the analysis of maintenance logs, staff flow diagrams, life cycle cost data, and daily cleaning schedules.
This evidence dictates how the asset actually behaves under real-world stress, not just how it looks in a promotional photo shoot.
The third domain involves experiential and user journey observations. This requires what we call multi-temporal on-site walkthroughs.
We do not just evaluate the asset on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. We evaluate the asset during peak hours, off-peak hours, day and night.
We systematically document sensory behavior, the transition of lighting systems as the sun sets, acoustic bleed during high occupancy events, and the stability of the atmosphere under varying operational loads.
The fourth domain is cultural and narrative materials. We require access to the internal intellectual property, brand books, identity guidelines, heritage documentation, and the original conceptual frameworks.
Why? Because this ensures we evaluate cultural integration based on the documented intellectual intent of the creators.
Separating authentic embedded authorship from superficial decoration applied by a marketing team after the fact.
The fifth and final domain focuses on financial and strategic indicators. We demand access to hard data. Average daily rate, revenue per available room, specific yield data across different asset zones, capitalization rates, and comprehensive competitive benchmarking.
We must measure the exact mathematical correlation between the asset's cultural depth and its balance sheet performance.
To process this massive volume of data, we synthesize these 5 data domains through distinct analytical frameworks. The first framework is experiential mapping.
This framework reconstructs the lived journey of the user. We execute chronological, spatial, sensory, behavioral, and operational mapping.
We document precisely how transitions, thresholds, and emotional peaks behave under real load.
We track exactly where the atmosphere collapses, perhaps due to congestion at a poorly designed elevator bank or poor zoning near a service entrance.
We are translating the subjective experience of moving through the space into structured, auditable evidence.
We pair that experiential data with the spatial and operational analysis framework. This is where we connect the physical architecture directly to the operational reality on the ground.
We analyze primary and secondary circulation paths, searching for those specific friction points we discussed earlier.
We evaluate the zoning logic, specifically looking at the absolute separation between front-of-house guest experience and back-of-house service operations.
We assess the proportional harmony of the spaces, the real-world aging behavior of selected materials, and the stability of the lighting and acoustic systems.
If the staff flow contradicts the guest flow, the experiential system fails, and this analysis captures that failure mathematically, feeding directly into dimensions 6 and 7.
The third analytical framework is cultural and identity analysis. Here, we measure meaning.
We rigorously differentiate between authentic cultural anchors and superficial decorative trends. We evaluate the presence of a truly authored worldview.
We search for symbolic contradictions and identity breaks across different zones of the asset.
We determine if the asset's cultural logic is structurally embedded in the architecture and service, or merely applied as a temporary veneer.
This analysis forms the foundational basis for measuring long-term strategic defensibility and brand equity.
The combination of all these frameworks is the economic translation and strategic reporting phase. This is where the mechanics connect directly for the C-suite.
We connect the preceding spatial, cultural, and experiential analyses directly to the balance sheet.
We demonstrate precisely, using the CCPI score, how cultural depth and spatial integrity drive demand elasticity, ancillary revenue capture, and capitalization rate behavior.
When an asset occupies uncontested conceptual territory, when it achieves a sovereign score in originality and identity, it dictates pricing.
We map exactly how emotional resonance drives behavioral loyalty, which drastically reduces your customer acquisition costs.
And reduces your dependency on constant, expensive renovation cycles just to maintain your asset valuation.
We deliver this strategic intelligence to the board through a highly structured reporting architecture. The report format is sovereign and standardized across all sectors.
It begins with the executive summary, stating the final 0 to 100 score immediately, and isolating the critical vulnerabilities and the core strengths.
This is followed by the cultural profile, the experiential journey breakdown, the spatial and operational findings, and the detailed economic insights.
Crucially, the report concludes with a strict, unfiltered disclosure of any red flags identified during the diagnostic process.
Now, a note on transparency. We maintain strict transparency boundaries regarding this report to protect institutional integrity and our proprietary intellectual property.
We explicitly define for the board what is public versus what is strictly confidential.
The dimension names, the overarching CCPI philosophy, and the final 0 to 100 score are public information that can be leveraged for brand positioning.
However, the exact sector weight matrix, The internal anchor definitions that define a 6 versus a 7, the mathematical aggregation formula, and the internal scoring sheets remain strictly confidential intellectual property.
This balance builds executive trust, provides you with the strategic data you need, while absolutely preventing competitors from reverse engineering the diagnostic to artificially game the system.
To execute this diagnostic in the field, we utilize a rigid 6-phase deployment protocol. Phase 1 is commissioning and scope definition, where we establish the operational context, define the specific asset boundaries, and finalize the confidentiality agreements.
Phase 2 is pre-visit analysis. This involves the comprehensive off-site review of all architectural blueprints, operational manuals, and financial documents to identify potential red flag zones and structural bottlenecks before deployment.
Phase 3 is the on-site diagnostic. This is the physical deployment of our team, executing the multi-temporal experiential walkthroughs, conducting key stakeholder interviews, and preserving the live operational mapping.
Phase 4 is evidence synthesis. We take the team off-site and we integrate the data across all 5 domains. We cross-validate the findings to identify structural patterns and contradictions.
If the financial data says the asset is premium, but the operational mapping shows critical friction, we isolate the discrepancy.
Phase 5 is scoring and governance review. Here, the lead diagnosticians assign the dimension scores using the proprietary anchors, apply any necessary overrides or red flags, and submit the complete scoring sheets to the internal governance committee for rigorous, peer-reviewed scrutiny.
Finally, Phase 6 is reporting and executive delivery, where we present the finalized CCPI diagnostic report directly to your board, outlining the immediate strategic implications for your capital allocation and asset management strategies.
The entire CCPI system maintains its sovereign credibility through strict institutional governance and version control. A framework like this must evolve with the market, but it cannot be subject to arbitrary changes.
We operate on a strictly defined version logic. Version 1.0 is the current foundational architecture we have discussed today.
Version 1.1 represents a scheduled calibration phase, adjusting specific anchors and minor sector weights based on empirical evidence gathered after evaluating the first 10 to 15 assets.
Version 2.0 triggers a major structural revision, executed only after evaluating 30 to 50 assets, incorporating deep cross-sector benchmark data to refine the overarching algorithm.
This governance structure relies on absolute, unbreakable integrity rules. No client, no matter how large their portfolio, may ever influence the scoring outcome.
No specific sector lobby may influence the weighting matrix. All evidence collected during a diagnostic must be formally archived for audit purposes.
And ultimately, as the data pool grows, we transition from internal benchmarking to rigorous cross-sector benchmarks.
We will mathematically compare the experiential yield of ultra-luxury hotels against mega yachts against private marinas, establishing a definitive global standard for luxury asset performance.
We have outlined the complete architecture, methodology, and strategic imperative of the Cultural and Creative Performance Index.
The mandate for your board is clear. Culture, identity, and experience are not optional marketing labels. They are not soft metrics.
They are the hard, physical, and conceptual infrastructure that dictates an asset's ultimate economic viability, its pricing power, and its competitive defensibility.
Failure to measure them as infrastructure guarantees systemic value destruction across your portfolio. So the next time you authorize a massive capital expenditure for a luxury asset, ask yourself, are you just funding a beautiful generic shell that will degrade in 5 years? Or are you investing in a fiercely authored, deeply integrated ecosystem? Because if you are not measuring the culture, you are leaving your valuation entirely to chance. And in this market, chance is an unacceptable risk. This strategic briefing is complete.